Right, let's go on to the next slide. Let's talk about the good old British press. I'm looking forward to this year tremendously. You've got Trump and you've got the UK election as well. And both these elections are going to happen about the same time. Probably about October, November next year. Well, November for the US, but probably October for the UK. Have you all cancelled your Netflix subscription because you've got the Trump trial to watch, remember? That's hours of fascinating television. Okay, I think it's going to be really, really interesting to watch. In the UK, we have, the conservative press, the right-wing press. Some of it fairly rabid, others not so much. You can see just by these headlines that I've chosen here. You've got newspapers like The Times, which is really centre-right. You've got The Sun, which is a fairly rabid right-wing newspaper at times. You've got the Daily Mail, which I would consider to be a rabid right-wing newspaper. You've got the Daily Express, which is crazy. Daily Express is a little bit like Fox News. It really is manic right-wing most of the time. And you've got the dear old Daily Torygraph down the bottom. All strong Tory government-supporting newspapers that are actually, if you read them, struggling now to make excuses for the mess that Britain has got itself into, particularly with people like Liz Truss, who was a dismal failure. I guess you all know she's the shortest-serving UK Prime Minister ever. Okay, counted in weeks, not months. But the good thing about the UK, if we could go to the next slide, is that you do have the counterpoint to that. Because the press in the UK has been established over so many years, which in Taiwan is the opposite, it's a very new media landscape here. You've got these newspapers that have been around for 100 years, some of these, more in fact, most of them. But you do have a left-right dichotomy. And the one thing that, if you go to the UK and you look at the newsstand and this whole spread of newspapers, and there's loads of them, as long as you read a good selection of these papers, you're going to get a fairly good idea of what's going on in the political background. You know, the censorship by omission, like these newspapers you're looking at here, if the right-wing government does something good, these guys will quietly kind of ignore it, and vice versa. You know, censorship by omission, I think, is something, because it's not there, people don't notice it. You do see it with organizations like Al Jazeera, where you get a regional type of organization. They will just ignore certain stories that don't really suit their narrative. And that's generally not noticed. It's not like writing a story that's trying to defend the indefensible. You just quietly don't report on it. And I think that's even more insidious than outright censorship. You just quietly don't cover something and hardly anybody notices, or only a few people will notice. I think censorship by omission is very, very important when you spot it. Why are they doing this? Why are they handling this story like this? Why have they completely ignored this story? And to some extent, it does happen in the UK. You know, if there's problems with a big government project, these newspapers here will, it'll be front page, and the Daily Telegraph will give it 2 lines on page 3. So, and that's something, you know, I haven't really noticed that too much here, but you will notice it here. You will see it here, particularly coming up to the election. Good things will be ignored, bad things will be blown up, depending on which way the political wind blows in that particular organization. And most newspapers have a political bias. You know, they do. I think the worst one here would be the Mirror, I think, very, very left-wing. And you can see there Boris Johnson, you know, with his Partygate thing that he had to resign over eventually. They blew it up massively because it was just attacking him straight away. And the Tory newspapers were tending to play it down. Oh, it's only a birthday cake and a few drinks. It's no big deal. And they were trying to play the thing down. But they couldn't ignore it because it was a big front page story. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. I don't know if any of you saw this story. Now, The Star, bless its heart, is a tabloid newspaper, clearly. But they're actually not a political animal. They don't really have a political leaning. They're not, you know, surprisingly, they're not right-wing. So when Liz Truss was basically screwing up the economy very badly, which is what she did, they likened her to a lettuce. If you're not, who's going to last long? longer. There's lettuce or Liz Truss, and the lettuce won. And it was such a, whoever dreamt that up in the editorial meeting, it was magic. It's just a brilliant piece of tabloid journalism. And I always look at the tabloids, never dismiss the tabloids. When I worked in the UK Parliament, in the lobby, there were more tabloid journalists doing the political news in the lobby than there were serious journalists like me, supposedly. They were always the ones that broke the stories in Parliament. It's amazing. The Sun and the Mirror have huge teams going through the photocopiers, going down to the bars, standing around in the lobbies talking to the MPs. The tabloids get most of the political stories before the broadsheets. It's remarkable. And people say, oh, it's only a tabloid newspaper. They really get the news in the UK Parliament, believe me. They pay very close attention to what goes on there. But I think that was a stroke of genius. The lettuce and the Liz Truss thing was just brilliant. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I should have some numbers. Oh, no, let's talk about Fox News. So you have newspapers with political leanings. Fair enough, we can all cope with that. We understand that. And as long as we know what we're reading, when we pick up the Daily Telegraph, you're going to have a pro-government spin on the stories. The Mirror, the opposite. The last few years in America, it's really gone downhill, and the same goes for Sky in Australia. Incredibly right-wing, very right-wing, quite radical kind of stuff, and outright lies. And it's gone another. It's not just a political leaning. It's not just Fox News. They lie. They'll sit there night after night after night and lie. And it's all coming to a head now with the whole Trump trial and January the 6th and all the rest of it. So there has been a comeuppance to these years of lies that groups like Fox News have engendered, the whole Dominion lawsuit against the voting machines and what happened in 2020 under Trump. And this continual lies, not just bending the truth, but outright lies, peddling outright lies. In my experience, in my 40-odd years in journalism, that's a new departure. That hasn't been happening aggressively. It's only been happening aggressively over the last maybe 10 years. It's introduced itself in the last 10 years. Politicians lie. You kind of accept that. And you look closely at what they say and you think, right, I can check that, cross-check that, or whatever. But to have big media groups like this one lying to you on television with millions of viewers, I think that's a very frightening and scary thing. If you have a closed media like China or Egypt, for example, somewhere like that, yes, you expect the newspapers to lie to you because they're peddling the government lie. They're basically saying what the government says. But this is a new departure in a country which has the First Amendment freedom of press. Everyone talks about it in America. And this is not a free press. This is peddling lies. And what's worrying me, if we go to the next slide, they're doing this. This is GB News and Talk TV. Now, these are two brand new TV channels in the UK. Ultra right-wing, not fascist right-wing, but right-wing, hard right-wing, and they lie all the time. They skate round the edges of defamation, but they basically tell lies. And I find that extremely worrying, particularly in a country like Britain, where you have a free press and fairness and balance, and it's all very important to the society. It's kind of inbuilt into the society. And this kind of poison is creeping into the media in some countries. Places like Taiwan really, really need to avoid this. And I think there has been one TV station that got shut down, didn't it? Can't remember the name of it. There was one here that got shut down. Good. That's a good thing, because this is what you don't need. You really don't need a Murdoch here. You know, yes, there are political leanings in the newspapers, but I find this very, very worrying. And it's happening more and more in countries that it shouldn't. And America and Britain are two very good examples of that. I'm going to bore you now with some numbers. I think my last slide, if it's there, otherwise I'll have to read them up. There we go. I looked up the World Press Freedom Index. I don't know if you're probably aware of this. It's got an internet site. You can look it all up. It's got a Wikipedia page to itself. It's very easy to look up. Let's just look at South Asia. There's 180 in this index. And you can see India, 161, Pakistan, 150th, Bangladesh, 163, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, and Nepal actually out of the whole group of South Asian countries does best at 95. It's in 95th place. So it's actually not bad. These are this year's figures. This is 223. The middle top, that's the bottom of the league. Do those countries surprise anyone? Iran, Vietnam, China, and the dear old North Koreans right at the very bottom. Okay, so China doesn't do very well on this front, unsurprisingly. I didn't realize it was so far down, but it's actually right at the very bottom, only surpassed by the DPRK. At the top there, Japan. I was quite surprised Japan is so low at 68. I thought it would be higher than that, but it's not. You can read the methodology of this if you just look up the website. It tells you how they measure it. It's worth looking at. Hong Kong, unsurprisingly, has collapsed over the last few years, and it's 140th place, no surprise there. And the US is 45. US actually doesn't do very well, which, again, I think is surprising. Probably that's a result of things like Fox News and those kind of media organizations that are peddling lies. So it brings down their average quite a lot. It should be a lot higher than that. Center middle, Taiwan, 35, right? Taiwan actually punches above its weight on this index. So I was very encouraged with that. And if you look on the right-hand side, Taiwan has been moving up this index over the last few years. It's doing pretty well. You know, a steady progress towards a free media. I would hate to see that go the other way. And again, I think it's a lot of training. If media companies here invest a bit more on training, they can keep that pushing in the right way. And just as a comparison with where Taiwan is, you've got Spain at 36, you've got Belgium at 31, and you've got the UK at 26. So Taiwan is doing extremely, it's European standard in terms of the media here, which I think is very encouraging. And I think if you talk to most people around the world, you'd say, where is Taiwan on this index? They say, oh, it's probably near the bottom. But in actual fact, it's absolutely not. And I think it does punch above its own weight.